Oh, howdy. I'm the old man of Ülemiste. This here's Lake Ülemiste, my home and muddy fortress. This here's Toompea Hill, where a great deal of excitement's gonna be taking place in the centuries to come. But our story starts a bit further off in Pirita River Bend, at the fortress of Iru. It was a really great spot. It had been an important settlement for a few thousand years already. It was a little distance from the sea, so as not to be too inviting for marauding pirates. The local Estonians didn't actually live in the fort full-time. The fortification itself consisted of a high enclosure of upright logs. The fort was usually used as a marketplace, and the people sought protection here only when uninvited nasty guests came to plunder. But later, when the folks got fed up with the bandits' habit of burning their wooden fort down, and the river became too shallow for ships, the Estonians abandoned this location and, packing up their odds and ends, took the bold step of moving closer to the sea, right to the top of Toompea Hill. Here the Estonians built a new and much bigger wooden fortress, Lindanise. This was a very good location for a permanent home, a natural sheer limestone cliff at the edge of which a wooden wall was built, on the gently sloping side of the hill, which was much easier to attack. A stronger limestone wall was constructed. The harbor and the sea were close by, which was very convenient for developing trade. Right away, business started booming and soon encompassed the whole Baltic Sea. This, of course, made others quite jealous. Well, it didn't take long, and there they were. The whole of Tallinn Bay was filled, as far as the eye could see, with a mighty fleet. This was the grand arrival of the Danish king Valdemar II the Conqueror. The Pope had actually suggested to Valdemar that he take his Danish forces and go on a crusade to Palestine. But the king preferred to conquer pagan Estonia. A bloody battle ensued, and it looked like the Danes were about to lose. The Danish archbishop prayed to the heavens, waiting for a saving miracle. God heard his prayer and sent to the Danes from above a red flag with a white cross on it. The Estonians also looked up and couldn't believe their eyes. The sign from God rallied the Danes, and they went on to win the battle. Valdemar moved into the fortress and declared that the gift from heaven was to be Denmark's state flag. And thus it began, the long-lasting enslavement of the Estonian nation. The Danes continued to fortify Toompea. They kept the Estonians a fortress and reinforced it at a lower plateau with a tiny wooden stockade fort. Some guys from the island of Saaremaa came to look at it and figured that it would be quite easy to burn down. Things didn't go all that well for the new rulers. Toompea Hill seemed to be to the liking of a lot of people, and quite soon some new characters showed up. In its case, it was the warlike German paramilitary religious order, the Brethren of the Sword. The Germans conquered all of northern Estonia and even defeated the Danes bunkered up in Fort Lindanise. Now began the energetic building of modern fortifications, and Toompea Hill saw the construction of its first stone fortress. But barely 10 years later, the Danes, with the Pope's support, got the fort back. They continued to fortify the stronghold that had, by now, expanded into a small city. At Queen Margarete's orders, the first closed defensive wall was built around the lower town that had grown up below the fortress. One nice spring, the Estonians organized a big uprising against the Danes. The situation became a bit too uncomfortable for them, and the Danes sold Estonia's 2 northern counties to the German order for 4 tons of silver. But the city continued to grow, and under the efficient control of the Germans, developed into the center for the Hanseatic League's trade with the Eastern Territories. And since there was a bit of wealth worth protecting, they continued to diligently fortify the city. Thus, a new stretch of the city wall was put up and a moat was also dug. The city's fortifications were constantly being refurbished, and so new defensive towers and gatehouses were being constructed. On the western side of the city, an imposing cannon tower was built. It took 8 years and 540 kegs of beer to put up. From the top of the tower, it was possible to see into the kitchen of many a city dweller, and thus the name Kikkenkök, a peek into the kitchen. Plus, the construction of a grandiose cannon tower, Fat Margareta, was completed. You know, I really like it here. Oh, as did the Swedes who were summoned here during the 25-year Livonian War. Along with the war, old Black Death sauntered by, who, without ceremony or mercy, took along over half of the city's population. But the war itself didn't actually do all that much damage. Nevertheless, cannons blasted a 2 oxen-sized hole into the wall of Kikkenkök. But this wasn't enough to capture the city, and the Swedes continued to rule it. The Hanseatic League was losing business, and ever fewer ships were pulling into Tallinn harbor. Nevertheless, the Swedes knew how to run things, and life generally improved. Even schools were established, and education was promoted. During that time of peace, the city was surrounded by grain fields and orchards. Even later, this period of Swedish rule has been regarded as the Golden Era. The citizens were content and even enjoyed their everyday life and tasks. But the threat of war was in the air, and Erik Jönsson Dahlberg, the chief architect, director, and inspector of all fortifications of the Kingdom of Sweden, arrived in Estonia. He brought a total change into the building of this city, and grand but ever-changing plans. Only about a quarter of these grandiose plans were ever completed, but a very impressive system of earthen fortifications and bastions was built around the city, the outstanding pearls of this being the Swedish, Ingrian, and Skåne bastions. But bigger construction projects were halted by the outbreak of the Great Northern War, and soon the victorious Russian Tsar Peter I arrived with his army. The Swedish king Karl XII eventually had no choice but to accept capitulation, and presto, a new era had begun. The construction of fortifications continued under the new ruler, and the system of bastions around the city was reinforced with half-bastions as well as redoubts and trenches. But the city wall itself lost its important role in the defense of the city, so that several of the towers were turned into prisons or warehouses, while some just remained unoccupied or were even demolished altogether. The same fate also awaited many of the fortified gatehouses. Due to the rapid development of weaponry, even the mighty bastions soon became militarily useless, and soon the passageways under the bastions were also forgotten. On top of the bastions themselves, parks were laid out, where the city residents loved to spend time and promenade. In the mayor's office, it was thought that the city wall should be completely demolished, since it blocks the view and obstructs traffic. So a road was built through the Skåne bastion, but they didn't manage to demolish all of the fortifications. But recently, interest has again been shown towards the crumbling city wall and the remaining towers, so that bit by bit segments of the wall have begun to be restored in its original form. Now the city's fortifications are protected national heritage sites. And the mighty Kikendikuk has even been made into a museum for promoting the city's history and fortifications. And the city has expanded in every direction far beyond the old defensive wall. Now it extends as far as my lake and even beyond it. People are just building whatever, everything and anything that comes to mind. Well, that's a laugh and a half. And this is contemporary architecture? I'm up here at Lake Ülemiste just keeping an eye on things. And when the city finally does get finished, then, as legend would have it, I'll flood this whole city!